Continue our ecology unit, and we are going to complete the last note taker for this unit, which is lesson number 9, Solutions and Protection of Virginia's Watershed. So make sure you have this note taker. It's very short, it's only 1 page long, and we're going to take notes and fill out the note taker as you watch the video lesson. So let's get started. So last time we looked at the global problems, and it was a little bit depressing looking at all of the effects of human population growth and all of the activities that are threats, all the activities of humans that are threats to biodiversity and to our environment. So we looked at reduction in amount of forests, deforestation, increasing the amount of variety of chemicals released in the air and how that causes pollution and ozone depletion and smog and excess nutrients, acid rain. And then we looked at the effects of intensive farming and habitat destruction, eutrophication, what happens when we introduce invasive species, overexploitation. And then we looked at climate change and we studied the greenhouse effect and global warming. So all of these are the global problems. So then the questions that we have to ask ourselves are, what are the local solutions? So what can you do to help? So the first thing that we have to understand is, first, understand that there is a problem, right? So education is very important, and that's why you're here and you're learning about this. So to learn more, I've included this link here called landscope.org. And it looks at all these different conservation partners here in Virginia. So we have to think locally. What can we do to help our local environment? So we see here that there's numerous government agencies, conservation groups, and land trusts that are working with the Commonwealth's many private and corporate landowners to permanently protect Virginia's natural and cultural treasures, and to be able to increase our outdoor recreational opportunities for future generations. So you can click on any of these programs here, like the Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries, and you can read more. And in many of these links here, it'll tell you what you can do to help. So what type of student organization you can start in your school, what type of volunteer work there is for you to do, what type of outreach programs, or pretty much how can you explain to other people, right? What are some of the threats to our local ecosystems and what they can do to help as well. All right, so another important aspect of understanding our ecosystem and how to help is understanding where we live and understanding how our actions affect our watershed. So let's first start defining what a watershed is. So in your note taker, go ahead and define a watershed as an area of land that drains into a particular river, lake, or other body of water. Now, we all live in a watershed. Some watersheds, like that of a stream or creek, are small. Other, like the Chesapeake Bay watershed, are very large. So here we have a beautiful picture of our Chesapeake Bay watershed, and we're so lucky to be part of this ecosystem and to be able to call this ecosystem our home. So it's also important to understand that even though we might not see the watershed, get my pointer, right? Even though we might not see that large watershed like Chesapeake Bay, we might have local streams, rivers, tributaries that lead to the watershed. So for example, someone that lives in New York might not understand that they are too a part of the watershed, right? And that all of their actions, every type of pollutant that they get into the water that runs along their local streams and rivers is going to end up in our local watershed. So it's very important to educate ourselves and understand that even though we are separated by state boundaries, that we are all interconnected one way or another. So let's understand a little bit more about our Chesapeake Bay watershed. So what is the size? The size spans more than 64,000 square miles. That means that it encompasses parts of 6 states. And the states that the Chesapeake Chesapeake Bay watershed covers are Delaware, Maryland, New York, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and West Virginia. and of course the entire District of Columbia, but that's not really a state. So that means that more than 18 million people live in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So that's a lot of people. Now, the major rivers, also known as tributaries, that flow into the Chesapeake Bay are the way I remember, Sally, please remember your jacket. So if you look at the first letter of this mnemonic, that's how you can remember the 5 largest rivers in the bay. That's the Susquehanna River, Potomac, Rappahannock, York, and James River. More than 100,000 streams, creeks, and rivers called tributaries thread through this watershed. Each watershed resident lives within a few miles of one of these local waterways, which act like pipelines that connect our communities to the bay. So think of all these little creeks, rivers, and streams within this large portion of all these states just flowing into the shed, right? So we all play a role, all the way up from New York, all the way down to Virginia. We all play a role in what happens to our watershed here. We're all responsible for those effects. So what are some of the issues that are affecting the bay? Again, there is so much to learn. So if you go to the cbf.org and you look at the issues, you can learn more about each specific issue that is affecting our bay, like agriculture, air pollution, chemical contamination, climate change, the dead zones that we talked about in the last lesson, fisheries, forest loss, habitat loss or degradation, land use, natural gas, offshore drilling, and polluted runoff. So those are some of the issues that are affecting the bay. So again, so this is a very important ecosystem that surrounds us. We need to become more informed on how do we save the bay. So if you go to cbf.org, how we save the bay, we're going to spend some time looking at some of these ideas and seeing how we as Virginia residents and residents of this watershed, how we can help, maybe with a little or a lot in saving our bay. So it all starts with advocacy, right? Understanding that there is a problem, forming community groups, restoration of our ecosystems, working together as groups with schools, and also through legislation in the courtroom, right? Sometimes you have to have certain rules and regulation that prevent the destruction of our bay and the contamination of our bay. So we need certain programs and initiatives like the Chesapeake Clean Water Blueprint that we'll learn more about in our activity. So this is our last lesson of our ecology unit. I hope you enjoyed it and have a great day.